Okay, Solicitors report.
Thank you. A couple of preliminary announcements. There was an executive session held prior to tonight's meeting, during which matters concerning personnel, real estate, and potential litigation were discussed. In addition, there had previously been sent out public notice of a hearing to have been held tonight regarding the application and appeal of 5 South State Street Enterprises, Inc., relating to improvements made to that property on agreement between council and the applicant. That hearing has been postponed, and a new hearing will be advertised appropriately when that comes up. In addition, under the solicitor's report on the agenda today was to discuss an amendment to the police collective bargaining agreement concerning adjustments to the pension plan. I've had some preliminary conversations, I've had some conversations with the Pennsylvania Municipal Retirement Services and some representatives there, and I do need to get some additional information on exactly what those changes will be, so I'm going to ask to postpone that discussion because there are going to potentially be some modifications. An issue arose with compensation last year to Chief Wojciechowski concerning unused holiday pay. That issue has been discussed by council, and I would ask for a motion to enter into an agreement resolving those issues as previously addressed, and also adjusting payroll to reflect the agreement of the parties.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Not. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Now we'll address that with the chief, and I guess Pat will be in contact. Okay, thank you. Sort of a matter of old business, but to address this, we had previously discussed the special event permit application, and a draft was circulated at the last meeting, and there were a couple of comments. I have circulated a revised draft and made some additional revisions, essentially to add a box on the front page that indicates that the permit fee is $250 per day, to add a section to the application asking if the applicant is requesting a waiver of the permit fee or payment for special services, and then giving them an opportunity to explain the basis for the waiver request. And then also adding language that if the event will require a closing of streets, for example, parade, race, street fair, attach a map of the event/route. So those have been the changes to that application. If council is comfortable, I would ask for a motion to accept and approve the special event permit application as I've described it. Otherwise, if you want more time, I can circulate it.
Need a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Not. Sure.
Before you call the question. Just a question. Was it $250 per day or per event?
The ordinance,
if you had an ongoing event.
the ordinance states $250 per day.
Okay.
Yeah, I had the same question, didn't I?
You did?
I did. I asked him.
Have we ever had any? I don't know. I was thinking if I don't even know if they get a permit, but sometimes churches run these vacation Bible school things, and it would be every Sunday for so many weeks or something like that, or every day during the summer. I don't know that they need them, but I'm not sure.
Well, again, I don't know if it would, but the ordinance does also have the opportunity for someone like a church, an organization such as a church, to request a waiver. So hopefully that wouldn't be much of an issue. But it was $250 per day.
And didn't we have some language in the ordinance about if it's a recurring event that only one application was required?
Yeah, and I looked into that. The recurring event would be if somebody's going to have an event, let's say once a month for several months, they can make one application, but the fee still applies per day of event, not per application.
Any further discussion regarding the application form? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. With your approval, I'm going to go a little bit out of order on the items, the remaining items. With respect to the sidewalk ordinance, I have received comments on the draft ordinance from both the Bucks County Planning Commission, very few, just one comment about naming of an exhibit, and some more substantial comments from the Borough Planning Commission. I have not had a chance to review all of those comments yet. I don't know that there's much else to discuss pending review of those comments, but I mean, I'm happy to open it up, but I think it may just be a matter of waiting until the work session to readdress those comments.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And the next item is the noise ordinance. At the work session, I've not had an opportunity to speak with the chief and Joanne about the enforcement of the existing ordinance yet, but I know that there was a desire to have some additional discussion regarding the proposed ordinance and the proposed changes, so I'm happy to answer any questions or engage in discussion regarding that.
Well, in case anyone has the same question I raised with you earlier today, Paul, regarding the difference between noise and noise disturbance and the definitions. Care to enlighten us?
Well, it is, I can enlighten you as much as I can. The noise ordinance, and just so everybody understands what we're referring to, just let me pull it out. Under definitions, the noise ordinance defines noise, and then it defines noise disturbance. And under the prohibitions, it prohibits excessive noise and the noise disturbance. And the difference between the definitions is subtle, but it appears to me that the noise is more, as the definitions are concerned, the noise issue seems to be more of an objective standard, and the noise disturbance seems to be more specific to the person hearing the noise. It is a subtle distinction, but it allows for the two definitions and the two prohibitions of excessive noise and noise disturbance. It leaves a little bit more flexibility in the enforcement. Once again, I'll reiterate my prior concern over this sort of what is by definition somewhat subjective language in defining what is prohibited, and obviously the desire that there be some more objective standards such as noise levels and decibel levels. But as it is right now, these definitions are relatively widely used. I've referred to a number of different sources from different areas, and those seem to be a constant in how those are defined based on prior case law and prior discussions.
Are there any other questions regarding the ordinance, proposed ordinance?
Yeah, I guess one of the concerns that we've talked about before, that's the enforceability of the ordinance because of its potential subjectivity. It would seem to me that we're going to have to acquire some type of measuring device to be used by the officers who are attending to the complaint, number one. Number two, I would assume that the individual or the organization cited has the right to take it to court. And in taking it to court, we're then going to have our officers go to court to appear and speak to the violation. And I guess the big question I have is, are these standing, in the case of New Hope, who I know has, does it stand up? Does it hold up? Or are we chasing the wind here? And I'm not against the noise ordinance, but I just don't want to pass something that's going to be chasing a windmill. Can we take this anywhere? And can it have clout and can it have meaning and can it be enforced? Or will it be considered an unenforceable event and all we do is incur the costs of paying our officer for 4 hours of compensatory time while they sit in the courtroom waiting for the case to be heard? And that's kind of what happens even when we issue parking tickets and speeding tickets and what have you. It's just something I would ask council to consider and to perhaps have some contact with some of the surrounding communities in terms of their success.
I don't know. Can you speak to that?
Well,
New Hope?
I do still believe, I don't know much about what's happening in New Hope. I know that with respect, again, a big part of New Hope's motivation had to do with motorcycles traveling through the borough, but with respect to those, they do have a much more objective standard and a trained officer that addresses the volume of the motorcycle engines or their exhaust or whatever it is that makes noise on a motorcycle. But the general, I believe that the ordinance as drafted and potentially revised in this form, I wouldn't say it's not enforceable. I believe that it is an enforceable ordinance. I believe that the subjective standard, even as subjective as it is, can still be enforced. However, it would be subject to potential challenge. But I don't necessarily think that what we would have here without that objective standard would necessarily be worthless. Let's put it that way. I'd be happy to make inquiry, particularly up in New Hope and in some other local communities, and see what their experiences have been. I'd be happy to do that and try to get back to council at the work session with some information on that.
I did email the chief and ask him regarding the cost of purchasing decibel meters and training, and if he had any comments, and he is to get back to me by the end of the month.
We're going to have a device that has to be maintained, it has to be calibrated. I mean,
And then, yeah, right. Well, that's, and if that's, if we need to go that far, then we need to get the information from him in terms of how how enforceable it is from his standpoint, too.
In speaking to the township chief, they have 2 decibel readers. They paid $1,000 each. They have to have something called a calibrator, and they have to be calibrated once a month. and then both the device and the calibrator have to be sent away once a year to be checked. So they are somewhat expensive devices.
I guess the other question would be, how often are they used?
Yeah.
I mean, in New Hope, I think you have a high volume traffic of motorcycles, and if you're looking to enforce that, you're probably using it every weekend. In Newtown Borough, we have, an occasional issue. So if you're not using them, then you probably have to calibrate them more often.
Maybe we can rent them from the township.
Or one.
Did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think the discussion's good, but the point still is that there's a need there. We started to look at this ordinance because there was something in the township that drew our attention and had us take a position in defense of the peace of the borough and the residents of the borough, and that causes us then to look in our own front yard and determine what we would do in a similar situation. So I think the ordinance that the solicitor is speaking to cleans up what we had before, but also looks forward to having something that would have some teeth. Whether we have whether we have actual equipment to pay for and have an outlay for to make it enforceable in one way, I think is a different issue. But I think what Paul just said is important, and that is even in the absence of that more objective scientific determination of noise levels, we do still have teeth in an ordinance. It's just a different kind of enforcement. And I'm not necessarily convinced that we want to go with an equipment-based program to have something on the shelf so we can pull it out in 6 months or once a year, or maybe even more frequently if it's needed. But I think cleaning up the ordinance allows us to do that. And we're also conscious of the budget. I mean, I don't know what these things cost either. If they're costing $1,000 each, that would give me pause. But I think that we have one business in the borough right now that we're dealing with this exact issue. It's ongoing and certainly gives some weight to the issue for us. So whatever we do, we at the least have to clean up that ordinance and have it ready to be enforced. And so I look forward to the comments from the chief as well, and also Joanne about the enforcement mechanism. But certainly we have to clean this ordinance up and be ready to go forward with it.
And to summarize how this is different from our current ordinance is that it doesn't, with the exception of restricting construction noise, it doesn't have the limits the way our current ordinance does, which says you can't have noise after 10 o'clock, but during the day noise is okay, basically. Our current ordinance. This version of the ordinance has the enforcement under the purview of the police department as opposed to the code enforcement officer, which is a change. And it's much more general in terms of what is considered, it's more encompassing in terms of what could be considered bad noise. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I believe it, as it's the draft currently stands, it has fewer specific prohibitions. But again, in the existing ordinance, those prohibitions sort of come in outside of the scope, potentially outside of the scope of that time limitation, just because, again, it's somewhat of an oddly drafted. But, again, I think that the existing ordinance also has teeth, but there are a few provisions in there that I think are a little bit uncomfortable. We've talked sort of half-jokingly about the provisions prohibiting whistling in the street. I mean, to some extent it may be a little bit archaic, but I do believe that the current ordinance has teeth. It's just its enforcement mechanism and its specific prohibitions may be a little bit inappropriate.